Now it's my pleasure to introduce Mary Southcott, who has been first Secretary and then Coordinator of the UK-based Friends of Cyprus. She first visited Cyprus in 1971 and was a founder member of the British Residents for Justice in Cyprus. Returning to the UK, she read an Open University degree aimed at making a contribution to Cyprus and UK politics. She has been development consultant of the Southwest Constitutional Convention. On visits to Cyprus, she has met most of the key players while accompanying parliamentary visits with British politicians. Since 1999, she helped run the Chevening Student Day with the Foreign Commonwealth Office, which involves bringing Cypriots studying in British universities to Whitehall and Westminster for a day of contact with the diplomats, ministers and MPs who helped to formulate British policy on Cyprus.
Thank you. Can I go behind the...
You can go where we want.
Okay.
Would it be able to hear or would
Easier to hear. Okay. I'll come out from behind there, but I want to go back because I usually improvise my talks, and I usually respond to what I've just heard. And I find it very difficult not to do that. And I think what we have in common, perhaps, is that there's a male model and there's a different way of doing things. And I find that every time I go out in public, I have 3 messages, and I always forget what the 3rd one is. So I know in the media, when you're talking to journalists, you never say, I've got 3 things to say, because you always forget the last one. The first one is, we need to change the culture of organisations, of politics, and the way things are run. The second one is diversity. It's really important to respect people who are different, to bring them together, and you get better problem solving if you bring people together in the first place. And like I say, I can't remember the third. So I'll go back to where I was going, which is that there was Gro Harlem Brundtland was the Prime Minister of Norway, and you notice that we have a Norwegian who's just come in as the special advisor to the United Nations Secretary General. And Norway is a country which a lot of people in Britain on the left would like to emulate. And I don't know how this new special advisor is going to turn out, but Gro Harlem Brundtland came as a member of the elders. Now, she's very unique because she was a woman member of the elders. The rest were Desmond Tutu, Carter, other people that I can't pronounce their names, but they had all been specifically prime ministers, presidents, blah, blah, blah. And she had done that, and she'd moved on. And what she did when she came to Cyprus was say what I did when I came to start working in Friends of Cyprus. Where are the women? I was first asked to put together a seminar in London, and that seminar was to have politicians, journalists, trade unionists, business people from Cyprus, from both communities. And we were all going to meet, and I had to find a meeting place in London where they would meet. And I noticed that all the people that were suggested to come were all men. It doesn't take you very long. Even if you don't know the languages, the Greek and Turkish, you can see which ones are men and which are women by the positions they occupy. So I said, well, perhaps we ought to invite a woman, even if it's a token woman, Turkish Cypriot and Greek Cypriot. And the chair, which perhaps I should mention his name, but since he's dead I don't mind, Lord Nicholas Bethel, said, over his dead body. And I thought, right, okay, over your dead body be it, because otherwise we weren't going to change. And I was going to be the secretary. I changed my name to coordinator. Secretary means typist to most people. And it doesn't mean that if you're a general secretary or you're a man secretary. It's only if you're a woman secretary. And so I was very lucky that we had Bobby Daniel, who was working for CYBC, filmmaker, artist, a wonderful woman, all-round person, and Oya Talat, who is the wife of Mehmet Ali Talat, who came to represent women's organisations in the Turkish Cypriot community. And I thought, what should we do? We're going to talk about defence or security. We're going to talk about economics. We're going to talk about work. We're going to talk... These are all male-dominated subjects. So I said to Jo Richardson, who was an MP, and she was the first women minister, Labour, you come and chair this one, because he worked cross-party. You come and chair this, we'll talk about education, we'll talk about the future, we'll talk about culture, and we'll talk about other things. And what I realised by having Jo there, she chaired it really well, was the women give permission to men to be honest and truthful about how they feel. And feeling and emotions are best used in categories with the intellect, and we talked about Stella, but she was an intellect. Laura said she was an intellect. I don't have an experience of her as a woman, so that is a problem. If women do male models and they end up by having to fulfill a sort of male type of role, there is a problem. Anyway, what happened was that first Ferdy Sawyer, who became Prime Minister in the North, he started talking about heart attack. He just had a heart attack, and he said he went to the doctor, and the doctor said to him, look here, there are things that you don't want to do, like exercise, that you're going to have to do, and there are things like smoking that you do like to do, and you're not going to do them anymore. And he said, and that's how we'll get a Cyprus settlement. Not have our ideal solution out there in the ether, but to really practically say, we've had a heart attack, we've had the equivalent on the ground of a heart attack. We had 2 heart attacks, so we had 3 heart attacks, depending on what you want to call them, peace operations, coups, whatever. And then we need to actually move on. And I thought, this man is talking differently from the way he talks when he's in his political meetings with other men. And there were other illustrations. And I'd asked him if he would bring the photographs of the people who occupied the house that he was allocated after 74. So Greek Cypriots had left, and they left their photographs behind. And his father had said to him, put them away very carefully in the cupboard, and one day we'll be able to give them back. And I said, well, why don't you bring them to London? And he brought them back to London. He brought them to London. And we had all these men and women looking to see if they could identify from the school photographs which person it could possibly belong to. And they went back to Cyprus and they found that person and they gave them the photographs. That's very powerful. I've also been at women's meetings where women have shared their loss. So a Turkish Cypriot from Tokmi, who lost all her male relatives over 16, talking about how that felt. And a Greek Cypriot saying that actually a Turkish Cypriot rather than a Turk, who killed her father in front of her eyes. And to face what it means to be Cypriot and have had those losses and those experiences is really important. Yet how many times do you hear them on a political agenda? You talk about, the free freedoms. We talk about not being a minority. We talk in the cliches of the past. And the past is the past and it has to be updated. So let me go back to my notes because I don't know what I was going to say. Well, what I noticed, Alicia has done a very clever thing. She got men to talk about their emotions instead of the boring way they normally talk. So Stephen Allen Wright is that I've only ever heard being a mayor or being a totally leader of Merton Council suddenly talked about something fascinating. Because I didn't know Pierce Brosnan had been grown up in London. I didn't know these parallels in their lives. And yet everybody has them, men or women. Now there was a book that I read when I first decided I was a feminist. I think I first decided I was a feminist when I went to Cyprus after college. It was 1971 and I'd read Germaine Greer and I thought I don't have any problem with women or men, I'm not need to be a feminist. And then I was hit by this culture and I thought, maybe I do need to be a feminist. So I read this book called Is the Future Female? And the answer the author comes to is that the future isn't necessarily female, but it is feminine. And men can embrace their feminine as well as women. So that women can work with people like Desmond Tutu, who jumps up and down all the time and really enthusiastic and wants to pass on the messages from South Africa. And he's wonderfully empowering for people that he meets, young people that he's met in Cyprus. And I don't think that this is a male-female thing. I think it's the way we do things in a linear way, or the way we organise hierarchy, which you mentioned, patriarchy, whatever we call it. And I do think Cyprus has to really leap ahead into the future if it's ever going to get a settlement. And I call it a settlement, not a solution, because solution, we all have our own idea of what we want to go back to, what we want to go forward to, what we want to have happen, to recognise our rights. And what we're going to get is going to be muddy and murky and a settlement which can allow things to happen. And if that is a fair settlement, and it won't be judged by these ideal solutions, it'll be judged by, is it practical on the ground? Will it allow people to work together? Will it allow Cyprus to have an identity of its own? Will it allow Cypriots to be Cypriot citizens? So let me just quickly see if I've lost everything. I want to talk about another musician. Katie Economidou is somebody who sings in public. I knew her as a rapprochementista. She gets together with Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots, and she formed the bicommunal choir. The bicommunal choir might not be your standard of music, but it is good because it illustrates something that Cypriots can do together, and did together, and formed together, and worked in Pila when they weren't allowed to use Legia Palace, when they weren't allowed to cross the line. And it's symbolic that they've been and travelled. And they went to Istanbul, and people noticed there that Cypriots were slightly different from Turks and Greeks. And instead of being tied up in that big argument, they became a choir that was saying, we can overcome basically our differences. And now she goes and does concert performances in churches and around about, and she takes with her her accompanist, and her accompanist is the Turkish Cypriot Chamber of Commerce president, and he's called Fikri, and he plays the piano. And he's so moved by the fact that his audiences are hearing him and Katie perform together. I think that's really, really important. I've read a lot of politics. I've heard a lot more. And it makes you despair sometimes of politicians. And politicians will always go for votes, and that's what I said in my talk yesterday. But we have to find what is good in them, because I think they have to find their courage and get to this settlement. Women tend to look culturally in a different way, not to have one aim and then go linear to it, but to try and get people together, to work for consensus, to find agreement, to move forward. And I've read a very good book. There's a book called Justice. This comes into my chapter that I did in James Kerr Lindsay's book. And it's about justice being with a veil of ignorance. Justice is what you would choose to have happen if you didn't know who you were going to be, man or woman, Turkish Cypriot or Greek Cypriot, if you didn't know whether you were going to be rich or poor, part of the establishment or not. Peasant, I should say, for Nora's sake. And that veil of ignorance means that you would choose a just society, and that's John Rawls, and he was a man. And he got criticised for this because he said it wasn't part of multiculturalism. Lots of people complained about it. So he wrote another book, and it was called Political Liberalism. And political liberalism suggests the idea of overlapping consensus. An overlapping consensus, I had this row with the High Commissioner yesterday about whether you're a Turkish Cypriot or a Cypriot Turk or vice versa. And overlapping consensus is that you don't have to agree on everything to work forward. The best of the women that I know in Cyprus have decided to do something, to solve a problem, to move into that ground where people can join them and do it together. And I should mention some names because Stella's good friend, Helen Soteriou, a cancer doctor, left her job here, and she was so neglected there that she couldn't get a job there, even though she'd been a consultant there in the UK. And Helen started, she had the imagination in politics, she knew Barbara Castle, she had the imagination to say, let's have the women walk home. Let's just say that women should go back to their homes. And she organised that Women Walk Home movement in 1976. And that went on and did a lot of creative things. Diana Markides worked with her. Diana came back and became male model person that she could by talking about history, researching all the things that she could find in the archives. I don't think that's the way to do history, and she and I have this discussion all the time, because I think the oral history is very important, to listen to what people are saying. And in Cyprus, what people are saying is not the monologue that Yasmin Harris mentioned yesterday, monologue. It's an interactive log, if you like, a multicultural log. And that needs to be discovered in Cyprus. I'm just going to have a quick look at my notes again, and then I'll shut up. I wrote down all these people who I thought were brilliant, and including Tabitha. We list her reports from Cyprus. There are people like Cynthia Coburn, who went to Cyprus and helped the women start an NGO which was called Hands Across the Divide. I think I discovered the divide word. I think I introduced it into public parlance, because it was something I'd been working on in the UK, and said it to Seb Golurudag, who'd done brilliant work on the missing, the oyster with the missing pearl, about the families of the missing. There are people like, British politicians who've taken a role, like Barbara Castle, Joe Richardson, Lena Jager. There are people now that I shouldn't sort of dwell on, but the Czech ambassador, Vera, I don't know if any of you know her, but she decided that women had to play a role in Cyprus, and so she promoted them. They met in Pila, they did things together, and out of there came Androula Vassiliou, Katie Clarides. I wanted to tell you that when I was trying to get the Friends of Cyprus delegations, not all male, but we still have a problem in the UK as well as in Cyprus, to meet with people who weren't necessarily men, I found that I could introduce Katie Clarides because she was the daughter of the president. And then she introduced us to Neshe Yashin, Maria Hadji Pavlou, and other women that these men had to then listen to. And then Peter Boxer, who was the person responsible for the relationship with Turkish Cypriots from the British High Commission, said, well, what if I do a dinner? Instead of you having a dinner with some high official in the Turkish Cypriot community, why don't I get civil society together? And he put the MPs from the Friends of Cyprus, one on each table. One of them was unlucky enough to get me. But we then shared with women as well as men, because civil society is basically run by women. I'm not the business side of it or the trade union side of it, but every other bit of it is infused with women. So quickly, Victoria Hislop's new book, that might be interesting. Sybil Seba is standing as a Turkish Cypriot leader, interesting. Eleni Mavru has been mayor of Nicosia, she's spoken to this group, interesting. We can see now that even the Amphicip have caught up, and they've got Lisa Butterheim and Major General Kirsten Lund, a dual woman ticket running an Amphicip in Cyprus. Things have changed, they've changed a lot. Politicians behave as if they haven't, but they have. And women need to find not only their voice, but their political power.